Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about this stabbing spree that went down in the city of New York, specifically in the borough of Manhattan, under District Attorney Alvin Bragg's watch, because it is a perfect example, a perfect distillation of all the warning signs being there, the police actually making arrests in the past, the trial process going on, somebody being convicted, but District Attorney Alvin Bragg deciding, you know what, you get a slap on the wrist. It doesn't matter that this is your 8th time. It doesn't matter that you have a violent history. It doesn't matter that we have 2 separate instances where you are deemed to be mentally ill and dangerous. The facts are we can't ever lock anybody up in the city of New York under Bragg's watch, because how could we ever deprive this innocent angel Aladdin of his freedom? And although I'm going to point out and mock the woke criminal justice system throughout the course of this video, I want to make something 100% clear. This is no laughing matter. This man was able in a single morning to take the lives of 3 New Yorkers, 3 everyday people, some of them working blue-collar jobs like construction work. And even though now he's been arrested, even though now he's facing 3 separate murder charges and will likely be locked away for life, the fact is that doesn't help any of those people. And I waited until we got the results from the 3rd victim, who was maybe going to make it as earlier reported, but unfortunately she passed away. And this is what we have to deal with in this great city. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
Good evening, I'm Maurice Dubois.
And I'm Christine Johnson. The woman who died tonight is 36 years old. 2 men also died from their injuries from the attacks. The suspect tonight is facing 3 counts of murder. Investigators say it was a cab driver who helped flag down police to get the man into custody.
Look, I understand that the local news wants to give us a little bit of positive related to this horrible story. I totally get that. And this taxi cab driver who identified the suspect, flagged down a police officer, and ultimately ended up leading to his arrest. He's a good person, and he maybe did save another person from being stabbed or even being killed in this particular scenario. But to be clear, there's nothing to be jovial about. There's nothing to cheer about. I'm actually going to jump to the end of this local news segment so you can get an idea of this particular rampage, so you can understand what went down right here, and you'll get why I'm not really interested in the praising of the cab driver all that much, because we have to condemn Alvin Bragg first. Yes, give the guy commendation. Give him a key to the city. Give him the due that he is deserved, because he is a regular working class guy who saw something and acted and ended up potentially saving other people's lives. But let us not forget that 3 people are dead due to the actions of District Attorney Alvin Bragg, due to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office refusal to do their damn job.
The stabbings spanned across 3 different neighborhoods, from 19th Street in Chelsea to 30th in Kips Bay, then up to 42nd Street and 1st Avenue.
Surveillance video shows Rivera shortly before the attacks putting on a gray hooded sweatshirt, a hat, and a pair of gloves. He then pulls a knife out of his backpack and places it into his front pocket. According to detectives, his stabbing spree began just before 8:30 in the morning at West 19th Street and 8th Avenue in Chelsea. Rivera allegedly approached a 36-year-old construction worker, Angel Latalandi of Peekskill, and stabbed him in the abdomen. The victim was taken by ambulance to Bellevue Hospital, where he died from his injuries. 2 hours later, just before 10:30, Rivera stabbed a 68-year-old man multiple times on East 30th Street near the FDR Drive, who was fishing along the East River. That man also died at the hospital. Police say the final attack happened at 10:55 near the intersection of 42nd Street and 1st Avenue. That's where investigators allege Rivera stabbed 36-year-old Wilma Augustine of Manhattan in the chest and left arm. She was initially listed in critical condition at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center, but died hours later.
People are making a lot of hay of how much this guy traveled across Manhattan. He started near the Hudson River, made it all the way to the East River, and then got up around 42nd Street before anybody called the police, before anybody was able to identify him. But the thing that you need to understand is that Manhattan is actually not that large geographically, so this is not that surprising. And although he did have blood on him by the time that he was arrested, we don't know how much blood he had on him after the first killing, which is the major amount of travel that he actually went through. But I do want to point out that the first victim in this particular case is a construction worker. He's just an everyday person. He probably didn't live in Manhattan, so he probably had no influence on the Manhattan District Attorney. And then then he makes his way over and kills an elderly man, 67, while he's fishing, before eventually going to 42nd Street and First. They say near the UN, but what I think is important is that this is actually near a ferry stop where many a commuter would get off and ultimately end up walking by. And this was in broad daylight. It started at 8:30, around 8:22, and ended around 10:30 when the cab driver eventually spotted him, and that led to the arrest. And this just happened. This was just a thing that occurred. And normally when there's a tragic case like this, a spree killing, an anomaly of an event, I wouldn't cover it. But unfortunately, there are policy implications that allowed us to get to this point. Of course, this guy had a history of mental illness. He's been flagged 2 separate times for those mental illnesses. He was living in a New York City homeless shelter. So again, if you had the social workers ready to intervene, he was living in the place where they were, but he still managed to get access to 2 large butcher knives. He still managed to go on this killing spree. But in addition to those mental health alerts, he also had a lengthy criminal history. And in fact, he was convicted and sentenced for a crime, which was a burglary and an assault, violent individual, on October 17th, not of last year, but of this year. But less than a month later, he is out on the streets killing people, and the reason why is because his sentence, despite his lengthy criminal history, despite the fact that it was a burglary in which he was violent, was time served. He was just let out. District Attorney Alvin Bragg said, okay, you're guilty. We have you convicted. You're free to go. Good luck, citizens of the city of New York. I gotta go harass Daniel Penny and try to put him away for life because he dared step up to a crazy homeless person, the same type of crazy homeless person that my office is making it their business to release onto the streets.
Yeah, both of those, Kurt and Rosanna, definitely a lengthy rap sheet, charges from different states, all a very bad combination for that man to be out on the streets. But that is what happened here yesterday.
Again, according to the New York Post, the suspected madman behind a deadly stabbing spree in Manhattan Monday has a long criminal history and had just walked free from Rikers Island a month before the terrifying attacks, according to the Post. Ramon Rivera, 51, identified by sources as a person of interest in the bloodbath, was released from jail on October 17th on a time-served sentence for a spate of recent burglary and assault convictions after spending most of this year behind bars, according to sources. What is one of the #1 things that I try to highlight on this channel repeatedly when we talk about criminal justice related issues? It is the violent repeat offenders. Sometimes they're homeless, sometimes they're mentally ill, although that is not a prerequisite to me covering it, that continuously get slaps on the wrist. When I originally encountered this story, I thought he was convicted of just a burglary, just an assault. But apparently, this was a bunch of burglaries and a bunch of assaults, and if you read that article clearly, what you will discover is that this guy was actually being held pre-trial in jail, which is something that I support for repeat violent offenders, but is something that is nearly impossible to do in the state of New York due to statewide bail reform. But this guy was so dangerous and so known to be dangerous prior to his conviction that they actually held him. They actually kept him in jail. They assessed him as enough of a threat to withhold his freedom from him because that's the level of danger that they knew he was before his conviction. But what happens post-conviction? He gets a soft sentence. He gets time served. Time served for multiple burglaries, multiple assaults. Time served for somebody that they know is mentally ill, that they know is violent, that they know is dangerous. Again, the standard for removing somebody from society used to be you can't take care of yourself. So we're going to put you into a facility if your mental conditions get to that level. We have changed that to a danger to yourself and a danger to others. He already met that threshold. He was already encountering the criminal justice system. 8 different arrests. Again, a group of burglaries that he was found guilty on, a group of assaults that he was found guilty on, and he got time served. He needed another chance. He needed to be let out. He needed his freedom more than 3 average New Yorkers who are working normal jobs, except for maybe the 67-year-old who could have been retired, who is enjoying nice fishing on the East River. They didn't need their lives. So this guy could go out and be on the streets for a month. It's not worth it. Obviously, this is a major problem. Obviously, these people need to be removed from the streets. streets. Obviously, we need to either jail them or institutionalize them, do something, because they're just ticking time bombs. And again, this is not an incident where somebody had some depression or something like that, or maybe they had bipolar disorder. I have people in my family with bipolar disorder. This is an instance where somebody was known to be a violent threat. He was living on the streets. He sometimes stayed at a shelter. They had every opportunity to intervene with the stupid ass social workers, and none of that worked. What would have worked and what was working was keeping him off the streets in the first place, in jail where he belongs. And by the way, the result of all this woke mercy, the result of him being treated with kids' gloves, that's exactly where he's going to end up. So instead, you have 4 people's lives wasted because you were worried too much about this guy's quality of life. He ends up right back in jail, and 3 people get murdered, which means 3 families have to exist without their family members due to the policies of District Attorney Alvin Bragg.
Police say he has several prior arrests for robbery and grand larceny in New York and New Jersey.
He's a male Hispanic, 51 years old. He appears to be undomiciled. He has 8 prior arrests, last being for a grand larceny October of this year.
Police sources say he lived in a homeless shelter and struggles with mental health. The mayor saying the unprovoked attacks are an example of the city's criminal justice and mental health systems failing New Yorkers.
There's some real questions that we need to look at on why he was on the street, and he has some severe mental health issues that should have been examined, and that's what we're looking at as part of the investigation.
Now look, he's described as the product of 2 broken systems, the mental health system and the jailing system, but the fact of the matter is, in this particular case, bail reform actually wasn't enough to put him back out on the streets. This was all on District Attorney Alvin Bragg. You know for a fact that this guy, being homeless, being mentally ill, did not put on a stellar defense that won over the judge that got him released on time served. What happened in this case is what always happens in these Manhattan cases, unless of course Alvin Bragg has a personal grievance against the person that happens to be the defendant, which is he got a soft on crime treatment. He got a slap on the wrist. The DA's office was so concerned for this innocent baby angel Aladdin, this guy who's just trying to feed his starving family by killing multiple people, that Alvin Bragg was like, you know what, we gotta let him go. We gotta see what he does on the streets, because it would be so cruel for us to keep him incarcerated. And again, I will point out, based on where these people were, maybe one of them, the guy who is 67 years old, lived in Manhattan. Most of these people likely lived in outer boroughs. Most of these people lived in areas that were churning redder, but the woke people in the city of Manhattan, the people that are going to ensure Alvin Bragg gets reelected, they're responsible for this as well. People talk about you voting for this, you get what you vote for, but that's not necessarily the case right here. What is the case is that the people in Manhattan vote for this, and everybody who has to commute there for work, everybody who has to be in the city for any which reason, they end up suffering the consequences of this. And hell, maybe some of these people were residents. I don't know. But based on where they were located, again, except for the 67-year-old who was fishing, I sincerely doubt it.
3 New Yorkers, unprovoked attacks that left us searching for answers on how something like this could happen.
And a lot of people are referring to this as a tragedy, but to be clear, it is not a tragedy. This is a foreseeable consequence of bad policy, of bad elected officials, of a politically motivated district attorney that takes money from guys like George Soros, who's backed by people like Shaun King, and all these different various progressives who believe in this stupid utopian world where if you're nice enough to the criminals, if you're sweet enough to the mentally deranged, then there will be no bad consequences of that there will be no backlash from that. These are the people who are concerned about the 9 unarmed black people who get shot by the police a year in the United States of America, concerned enough that they will let killer after killer back onto the streets repeatedly. I'm so sick and tired of this nonsense, of this ridiculousness. And yes, I am additionally aggrieved by this particular story because my wife works in the borough of Manhattan. She has to deal with the consequences of this. She's not somebody who's going to vote for these woke idiots at the district attorney level. She would never do that. I would never do that. But the fact of the matter is, as a part of living in a place where you have to commute to get to work. She suffers the consequences of it, like many people who live on Long Island, like many people who live in Jersey, that all commute to New York City and have to deal with the fact that people like Alvin Bragg exist, they're in power, and they're willing to use their power in such crazy ways that it emboldens criminals like this. Now, by the way, it is not an isolated incident what's going on in Manhattan. It's not just this case, because when you look at a chart of violent crime in the borough of Manhattan, what you will discover is that violent crime is up back around 2006 levels after dropping up until around 2019. This is when bail reform, the Black Lives Matter riots, and all that stuff was passed, and then it spikes in 2020, and it has gone up even further under District Attorney Alvin Bragg. And again, this is not New York City crime overall. This is just the borough of Manhattan, the borough that Bragg controls as a district attorney. Now look, Eric Adams ran as a tough on crime Democrat as the mayor, and I'm glad he gave a press conference where he talked about how these are the issues that he keeps bringing up related to New York City. I do appreciate that, but the fact of the matter is, the guy needs to call out District Attorney Alvin Bragg. If you'll recall, there was a reason I decided to break from normal tradition and back Lee Zeldin super aggressively during the 2022 gubernatorial race. And the reason for that is because Lee Zeldin made one promise that I said was definitely worth it, worth the price of admission, regardless of whatever else he would have done as governor. And that was to use his power as governor to remove District Attorney Alvin Bragg from his post at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. And I don't give a damn if that was related to him prosecuting the evil orange man or anything of the sort. The fact of the matter is, this guy should be nowhere near a prosecutor's office, because we see the consequences repeatedly from him being there, and those consequences are paid in blood. Again, just imagine you're in any of these three families. You learn that your relative was killed in the early morning, broad daylight of Manhattan while they're working or on their way to work or while they're fishing, and you have to pay for a funeral cost. Then you look on the news, and what do you find? They get the suspect, and he was released by a system that catered to that suspect just a month ago. After he was convicted, after he should have been sentenced, he ended up getting time served because Alvin Bragg doesn't give a damn about you, because his day one memo says we're not going to look for any carceral solutions until somebody actually murders someone. And guess what? This is the logical result of that. Criminals escalate in behavior. You have a certain amount of opportunities to get somebody off the streets after they exhibit deviant behavior before they escalate to murder, and all those opportunities were blown by. And the thing is, this guy's a lengthy criminal history, not just in New York City, but in other states as well. Other red flags, other things that you could have taken into account, but Manhattan's District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, refused to do so. So the blood is definitely on his hands, and he should never be forgiven for this. He should never be forgiven for any of the cases that are just like this that have occurred in the city of New York under his watch, because this is exactly what he promised to do. This is exactly what he wants to do, and he doesn't give a damn about these consequences. He's more interested in destroying our current system rather than going after the criminal, which means he should be nowhere near any courtroom in the United States of America, but for damn sure he shouldn't be on the prosecutor's side.
Ramon, what do you say to those victims' families?
The man accused of stabbing 3 people to death in Manhattan yesterday remained silent and held his head low as he was led out of the 10th precinct in handcuffs, even as reporters fired a barrage of questions at him. Police say 51-year-old Ramon Rivera, a mentally ill homeless man with 8 prior arrests, who now faces 3 separate murder charges, embarked on a crosstown rampage in the broad daylight.
3 people are dead. 3 people died. 3 people were murdered because they let this guy go, because they gave him time served, because they said, you know what, multiple burglaries, multiple assaults, no big deal. Oh, you have 2 different incidents where you were referred for mental health treatment? I'm sure it will be perfectly fine. Here's a couple of knives. Enjoy your time in one of our homeless shelters. We hope this doesn't backfire and spill out into the streets, or maybe we don't even care if it backfires and spills out into the streets, because for damn sure, Fat Alvin Bragg doesn't give a damn about this. But you know what? If I continue, I'm going to say things that I don't want to say, that I don't want recorded, and I'm either going to have to edit that stuff out or just, take the penalty from the YouTube gods. So I'm going to leave it here. As usual, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias. This has been me talking about a spree murderer that New York had custody over, could have stopped. Till next time.